questions. I would start with the claim that transitional justice is not simply about achieving democracy in a society that is emerging from a period of non-democratic rule. Secondly, transitional justice is not exclusively about establishing a just future society. It is rather about acknowledging and paying debts that some people in a very extraordinary situation owe to some other people. Transitional justice is primarily the justice for victims. It can be defined as a complex system of institutions, mechanisms, and processes that deal with agents and legacies of mass wrongdoings in a democratizing context. And as such, I almost wanted to say it is a civilizational process, but then I recalled what Zoran said this morning, and I said, okay, all right, I won't be mentioning the word civilizing process. At stake is the transition from the criminal regime to a democratic future. The term criminal past refers to the period of long-lasting systemic mass regime-sponsored wrongdoings and abuse of human rights that preceded political transition. Term wrongdoings points to the especially grave injustices: mass murder, torture, sexual violence, arbitrary arrest and unlawful detention, persecution of whole groups of the population, expulsion, forced deprivation and destruction of property, intentionally induced starvation, forced labor. Specific historical contexts of those crimes may be very different. Types of repressive regimes and conflicts also differ. Techniques of killing and humiliation differ. Still, at least one thing is beyond doubt common to all of them. They are all about mass killing, mass harm, and mass destruction. Empirically, the prime victims of all the known cases of mass crimes are civilians or innocent people, people who on no account deserved to be killed. And this is why I cannot see how can there be just society without transitional justice. Once such a criminal regime falls, it leaves disastrous legacies. Think of the elements of the old repressive apparatus. Think of emotions. On the side of victims, you find fear, despair, mourning, feeling of hopelessness. Go to Bosnia and just check. On the other side, we find all kinds of denial. We did nothing wrong. We did not know. We could do nothing to prevent it. We were only defending our genuine national interests. They are to blame. Even if we did wrong, it was only a legitimate response. The palette of forms of denial is frighteningly rich. Such legacies carry an important message. The regime change does not mean that the sinister past has been left behind. The basic question is deceptively simple. Should the new political community address such wrongdoings? There is one thing that we already mentioned several times, namely, that thing is really frightening. All the most important decisions about transitional justice after mass conflict are political decisions. Political decisions that are not legally clearly shaped. The first decision is whether there would be transitional justice at all. We had this small disagreement about Spain. So Spain and Uruguay are classical cases when the people or the elites decided to close the books because it was better for the future. In passing, it's very interesting to see that in Spain, between the conflict and the moment of transition, there was a large period of time. So this is the question of timing. Does the distance between wrongdoing and transition affect? Yeah, but it changed through time, right? And the second question that we also asked, I think it was you, Klaus, if we come up with measures and mechanisms of transitional justice 40 years after the crime, is it still transitional justice? So the time component is important. Then there are more disturbing things. What counts as crime and who are the wrongdoers? These are matters of political decision. Often you cannot identify all the individual perpetrators. Think about the Holocaust. This is the systemic crime that we were mentioning. Sometimes, and this is what you were saying, you identify direct wrongdoers only to realize that the chain of responsibility is very long, and the classical case is my lie, right? Very often, wrongdoers can claim that they were acting following the valid law. And the question is, what do you do? This is Nuremberg story. Had the German law remained valid, those people would have never been pronounced pronounced guilty, right? And then you had all those problems with finding a legal basis for Nuremberg. Then you have the question of who are the victims. This is not obvious. This is a matter of political decision of the new regime. You may have suffered terribly under the old regime, but if the new authorities don't recognize you legally as a victim, you'll get nothing. Neither compensation nor symbolic recognition. So transitional justice is about extraordinarily hard political choices. On top of that, there is this tension that we discussed between looking backward and looking forward. Dealing with crimes requires looking back into the past. Building democracy requires looking forward towards a better future. Skeptics argue that no balance is possible here. This is what Spaniards said. Contextually, very good reasons. We cannot have both. We don't know who's to blame for what happened in the 30s, right? The argument here is seemingly straightforward. Ideally, we would indeed have to deal with the recent injustices, but the context does not allow. This is the argument of the conflict between democratic transition and transitional justice. I would skip some steps in this argument. Just let me tell you, and this is what Misha was saying. The core claim here is that transitional justice is not always conducive of peace, stability, unity, and democracy. There is a powerful stream in transitional justice literature which says, close the books, burn the files, let the bygones be bygones, leave the history to historians and museums. Sometimes we have the claim that people are still not ready, and I'm pointing to Klaus because there is a German philosopher, Hermann Lübbe, who basically said, look, you should not force people into transitional justice. Because if you force them, they would come back to you with fake emotional pretenses. He calls it the political ritual of remorse. So if the state pushes with transitional justice and people don't want to accept it, you get disastrous consequences. Well, I'd like to argue that notwithstanding all the constraints, the choice of silence or choice of closing the books after mass atrocity is wrong on at least three broad accounts. First, it does injustice to victims and their communities. To argue that the criminal past does not matter comes down to arguing that grave injustices committed do not matter either. It denies any relevance to victims' suffering. It repeats harm to their human dignity. The successor regime is morally obliged to acknowledge recent wrongs because it is the victim's right to require so, and because this is the necessary first step in restoring victims' status of legal, moral, and political equality. Second, one of the most troublesome legacies of crime is often a political culture in which there are too many people who are engaged in self-deception. This is connected to something which is purely empirical, and the empirical statement I want to remind you of, or the empirical fact, is that no regime crime has ever been committed without strong ethical justification. Find me one. No way. Every mass killing was done claiming the good of certain group. The group in whose name the crime was committed, be they Aryans or Serbs or the white people in South Africa. The necessary Srebrenica. Good of the Serbs.
No.
Yes.
It is not genocide.
The necessary feature of such an ethical attitude, no problem. I'm used to having disputes with my students, and I'm always happy with people when people sort of interrupt me, so I don't get offended. Just feel free to interrupt me anytime. The necessary feature of such an ethical attitude is the representation of the targeted group in the same perverted ethical terms as the embodiment of everything that is morally wrong. The circle is closed by inferring the destruction of the enemy group is both necessary and good. Mass killing and other types of denial of basic human rights follow. Systematic criminal action against innocent human beings is justified by the claim that they are not simply inherently less worthy, they represent a danger to our good. And sadly, many people were ready to accept this. Now, the very act of the regime change cannot possibly make those who until yesterday voluntarily supported killing into decent persons. After the change, most of such ordinary people or bystanders stick to different strategies of denial. Third, I don't think that the official policy of closing the books can work as a pragmatic strategy. It mistakenly assumes that the line between the past and the present can be drawn by a political decision. It can't. And this is where we disagree on the meaning of the later Spanish events. Think about the post-Second World War Germany. Adenauer came in 1949 with the Erste Regierungserklärung, and he said, I want to draw the line. And he attacks the Allied powers. This is a brilliant piece of, just try to read it. I think it exists only in German, but try to find it and try to, have it translated. Basically, in 1949, Adenauer, who was an anti-Nazi with a pedigree, says to the Allies, you have to draw the line, because we cannot live like normal human beings if you impose the guilt on us or whatever. And look at the subsequent history of Germany. Trials in Frankfurt, Köln, wherever, 61. Think about the 68, think about the Shoah in 69, think about the Goldhagen historical Streit. The history is the history, the democratic German history is the history of the Nazi past coming back. That's extremely interesting. And the Serbian history, the Serbian contemporary condition is in different way a history of the unresolved past coming back. Okay, I had more things to say which were supposed to be more theoretical about the relationship between truth and justice, but since our chairman asked to cut short, I cut short. Thank you.